It's Friday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Central Europe, it's 3 p.m. in the UK, and it's time for another episode of our Space Café Scotland by Angela Mathis. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback as we will learn and improve based on that. I'm Thorsten, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keep our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that, and that's also helped us to run shows like that. In case you want to join the supporter team, be aware it's just a click away on our website, and it's very easy to join there. I know many of you are familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and our daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. So don't miss the latest one, which features Dr. Alice Gorman, Dr. Space Junk, space archaeology and an attempt to rethink humanity with a multi-award winning author and researcher. It's really worth every minute. We also have new episodes on our Space Café radios. I had the great pleasure to interview Stuart Bain of North Star live at the World Satellite Business Week in Paris. And we interviewed Haji Napier, the Director General of the Malaysia Space Agency at Lima 23 earlier this year. You can find your audio series wherever you get your podcast from. And if you want to become a space watcher and let the world know about it with your cool t-shirt or with your cool mug, so just to jump up here with this cool t-shirt, so visit our fan shop. It's always open on our website. In case you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the events section or, of course, on YouTube. And with that, my job is almost done for today. And Angela, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is our ninth, as we just Thorsten pointed out, our ninth Space Café Scotland, and I'm delighted to have Denis Bensoussan, who is, let him introduce himself, but he's from Lloyds, Beazley, founder of Lloyds Beazley. I'll let him do his own intro as to how he got there and why he finds it an exciting domain. And the topic that we're going to be exploring is enabling and protecting satellite services, the ultimate insurance frontier. Hello, Denis.
Bonjour, Angela.
Oui, bonjour.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So maybe an introduction, first of all, Denis. Do your own sort of give people the salient points of why what you find is interesting in the domain and what you're trying to do within the insurance sector at Beazley Lloyds.
Yep, absolutely. Just start with a brief intro. I've always worked in the space industry in various forms. I started in an international organization involved in space, and then I sort of switched to the financial world and start in the insurance industry in the early 2000s. That was an interesting time. If people remember, there was a time of turmoil in the aerospace due to 9/11 and all the trouble with the aviation industry. And then I start to effectively become a space underwriter, first at a Lloyds syndicate called Hiscox in Paris. And then 10 years ago, I started the space business at another Lloyds syndicate, Beazley, who's one of the leading Lloyds syndicates, specializing in everything technology, and space being one of those risky technology. And and being involved in all matters in relation to the satellite industry, the space industry, and all these sort of risk management aspects. So that's me in a nutshell. And since we're going to speak about space insurance, I think just as a sort of give you a little bit of background and context about what space insurance. I believe people are familiar with insurance, But space insurance, sometimes you need to give a little bit of context for that. So I think space insurance basically was born with the beginning of the commercial space age. And that dates from the first commercial satellite. That was an Intelsat satellite that was sent. And the idea was effectively to provide commercial communication and TV signals. And space insurance became the way for commercial company to protect their asset, to protect their revenue, to protect their services, and at the same time obtain financing from traditional banks and financial institutions. So that's when space insurance became necessary for those commercial entities being involved in space, which was quite different from who were the previous player in space, who were only states, basically, and scientific agencies who didn't require to protect their revenues or their customers. So space insurance became a sort of an emanation of the aviation market, the aviation insurance market, which was providing protection and coverage for airlines and aircraft manufacturers. So from that environment, specialist underwriter decided that commercial space activity were insurable and designed wordings and provided coverage and were able to price space activity. So that's, in a nutshell, space insurance. What is really characterizing space insurance versus other class of insurance is it is a very niche and bespoke market, because space is very different than anything else. It's not on the Earth. I think that's obvious to anyone. And so the risk of space are pretty specific and very different to anything we have on Earth. The space environment is very risky by itself, and the risks are effectively completely different. And there was a need to understand those risks and understand the specifics of the technology as well being used to go to space or to operate in space. So a new sort of generation of experts sort of educated themselves, and with the development of the commercial space activity, the knowledge base and the database for space insurance grow, and it became effectively a full-fledged business in the 80s and the 90s, when commercial activity in space were becoming the majority of the activity. And along those lines, it developed into a standalone market with very specific underwriters, specific business development, and specific client as well. So it is characterized, with the fact that usually space insurance comes as the third cost for any space project. Usually you got the cost of procuring the satellite, then you got the cost of launching that satellite, the launch vehicle, and then space insurance basically ensuring the asset and the performance of the asset comes third. So it's a pretty significant cost in a program. It's a business, as I said earlier, it's niche. It's niche because not many people are equipped to do that, not only in terms of capital and expertise and knowledge, but also with the sort of the willingness to effectively go in a sector which could be volatile, could be seen as volatile. Basically, you have potential of catastrophic event. You have very unique risk and exposure. It's a very complex and technical environment, and every insurance policy basically is different from one another, the same way any satellite is pretty different from one another. So you need to adapt. And as a result, the sort of the scaling and the sort of generic sort of wording that you have in other class of insurance doesn't really apply to space insurance. So that's in a summary what is space insurance, and it's basically a class of insurance that is required to cover commercial activity in space, and which require effectively experts, which are basically being able to judge the quality of a space mission, space technology, space assets, judge the behavior of the people operating those assets, and then put a price on that, basically assessing the reliability and the capacity of those technologies and operators to guarantee the performance of the satellite over a period of time. And
it's usually a means to generate a revenue stream. So can you maybe just for the sake of people who don't have knowledge in the specific of this area, that would be interesting for them to understand. Yes, there's the asset, but afterwards there's the business model that it's supporting, and how does that get insured, or how does that get dealt with?
Yes, so usually the satellite is at the core of a sort of a constellation of risk, and basically as a space insurer, you have to assess individually all those risks. So the satellite itself is basically all the hardware on board and making sure that they're going to be reliable for the lifetime of the satellite, which for GEO satellite could be up to 15 years. And knowing that there is no way until probably in the near future, but not today, no way to repair a satellite or to service a satellite. So the hardware has to be built in a way where it could support the harshness of the space environment, which everybody knows about. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but radiation, thermal cycling, lack of gravity, and space object as well. You have to look as well at the way to get to space. So that's the launch vehicle. So we're doing the same sort of assessment from a technical point of view, looking at the design of the launch vehicle, the track record. We're looking at the space environment exactly as well, where the satellite is going, which orbit. And we're looking at the people operating the spacecraft, what sort of reputation they have, what sort of experience they have in terms of controlling a satellite, and in terms of behavior as well, in terms of mission and approach to risk and risk management approach. So we're doing that, and we're doing that usually at the time when the satellite design and procurement is frozen, and where effectively the operator needs to obtain finance to buy the satellite. And usually, because it's a very large expense, the majority of satellite operators do need finance, and as a requirement, as a condition, the banks and the financial institution require insurance on the asset, making sure that if something goes wrong, if the business goes down, the banks are able to liquidate and recover healthy asset, basically. So insurance has evolved across the years as an enabler of space project, because it allows to obtain finance and to complete financing for the satellite. And so it became a requirement for big satellite project, where the protection of the asset was a requirement. So that's for the one element of the space insurance. There is another part that we may discuss more at length in later on. It's the liability. That's a sort of international requirement that's an emanation of the International UN Convention, which were elaborated in the 70s, and where every member state, who is responsible for the space activity and especially liable for any damage that those space activity would cause to people on the ground, or property on the ground, or other properties in space, basically. And those conventions made mandatory this liability. And as commercial space evolved, the state delegated the capacity to do space activity. And as a result, in return for that delegation, which came in the form of a license to launch and to operate satellite, a lot of countries have decided to put an insurance requirement so that the state is not exposed, the state finance, the state coffer are not exposed to any damage that would be caused out of that delegation, basically, and that the commercial entity will always have the means to compensate any damage that it would create through an insurance. So that's another sort of sector of space insurance that's called liability insurance, or TPL in our language, and that covers effectively any liability in relation to the operation of a satellite or to the launch of a rocket, basically. And again, liability insurance is an enabler, because if you want to have a license and launch a satellite, you would need to buy a third-party insurance liability requirement under most spacefaring country. And that's also the first port of entry, and for many new space operator, that's their first contact with insurance, is effectively obtaining mandatory TPL insurance for their activity.
Now you say that, Denis, but what are, in LEO, for example, where there's a majority of satellites, LEO compared to GEO and the other orbits, how many satellites today are insured? Because that surprised me, the numbers. Can you share that with? And what's the rationale? Why not? And maybe you could say how you think that might evolve.
Yes, thank you. I think that's part of the evolution of commercial space. Until probably the last 10 years, space was on top of being the area for government and any sort of scientific and military activity. Space was exclusively the area for large commercial company, mostly doing communication or broadcasting activity from the geostationary orbit, so 36,000 kilometers above the Earth. And that orbit was the orbit for all the big stationary satellite. We're talking here about 4-ton, 5-ton, 6-ton satellite costing hundreds of millions of dollars, and having large insurance policy as well. And so most of those assets were covered under insurance. And today, I think it's probably about 50% of the population in geostationary orbit, which is covered by an insurance policy. What changed in the last 10 years? We've seen the emergence of NewSpace, or Space 2.0. And basically, that's the birth of all those startups, first from the Silicon Valley, and then from other places in the world, Europe, Asia, which basically completely changed the paradigm of doing space. And they were helped in large measure by the reduction in terms of cost of electronics, the miniaturization of electronics, and most importantly, by the reduction of cost of launching. Access to space has been divided by a large number, And I think thanks to SpaceX and the transport, the rideshare opportunities, space has become effectively not cheap, but much more accessible, way more accessible than it used to be. And as a result, we had thousands of small company, university, space amateur who have been able, over the last 10, 15 years, to launch a small satellite mostly in low Earth orbit for a variety of application, remote sensing, observation, monitoring of Earth activities, scientific purpose, experimental purpose, communication, IoT. Any sort of application has been tested and experimented with in the last 10 or 15 years by those small sat. And here, the philosophy, the approach, the business model is very different from the business model of the legacy space operator, the one operating in geostationary orbit with 300 million satellites. Here, you're operating with very small satellite in low orbit. The cost of those satellites is in the hundreds of thousands rather than in the $1 million or $100 million. And then the desire and the need for protecting those assets is not the same. And also the way finance has been built for those space projects is completely different. You know, when you don't need banks, or when you can't get access to banks or financial institutions, but your money comes from grants or from university or comes from venture capital, the appetite for technical risk is completely different. And I would say is much higher. When you're a venture capitalist financing thousands of space startups, you're not so much concerned with the success or the technical performance of one single satellite. You're looking at the global picture, and you can afford to lose hundreds of satellites to the extent that one of them or one company is extremely successful. And that's the calculation, and that's a totally different environment in terms of risk management. You don't protect satellite in the same way. Same thing if your satellite is just a test bed and a way to experiment with some electronics or some hardware. You don't need insurance to protect those. You start to need insurance when you got asset to protect, when you got a mandatory requirement from a bank that's loaning you money, or when you got revenues to stream to protect or customer to protect. So as a result, asset insurance wasn't a requirement at first hand. So that's why today, the large majority, and I would say it's only the very exception of small satellite in low orbit, which are currently insured. We're talking here about, 5, 6, 10% of the population of satellite in low orbit, which are buying insurance. And the one buying insurance are doing it for the same reason as the legacy operator. They do that because they want to protect their customer, they want to protect the banks that are giving them money, or the investors which giving them money, or they want to make sure that they got a chance to bounce back after a failure. And we've seen few occurrences in the recent month that insurance was effectively helping some company which suffer some failure to bounce back and get back to business. But for the majority, insurance was not required, at least at the beginning of the adventure. And to some extent, we just at the beginning of this adventure for most of the new space sector. This is the beginning. For some, we're getting into a stage of maturity, and that's something that we are observing today. That's NewSpace is progressively maturing, and the edge of maturity is coming after growing pains, if you want. And then insurance become again a consideration and sometimes a requirement, because when you grow, you need bigger satellite, so more expensive satellite. You need to provide service to paying customer. You got contract to honor. You got banks and loans to repay, and then insurance effectively become an asset in your business model and become an enabler in your business model, and you back to the sort of traditional mindset of legacy space. And we're seeing that evolution. So effectively, hopefully, the small percentage point of the satellite being insured today in LEO orbit and in the sort of small sat sector is growing. We see that number growing. We see now that more and more companies in that sector are becoming successful and growing, and insurance requirement or insurance need is growing with them as well. So that's a very positive development, because one thing I would add is insurance help the promotion of a more healthy, of a more sustainable, of a more risk manageable risk environment, basically. So it contributes to a more sort of friendly environment. That's what we observe in other sector, and I think space is effectively ripe for that transition. We're still within that transition, but we're seeing the first sign of a very positive evolution, and effectively NewSpace sort of keeping his ethos and what has made her successful, but transitioning towards the mindset when it comes to risk management of experience and legacy operator. So that's a positive development, and that's one we encouraging as well.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say to you, does this lack of, because of the different sources of investment for the new space, which you use the term going towards mature space, even if it's new, it's not legacy, it's the mature space. I was going to say, is that what's contributing to this perception, or this, this, people have an angst actually about the amount of satellites that are going up there and nobody really cares. And if they, as you just said, if you lose satellites, who cares? But you're saying that this is an evolutionary process, and it's going to, as you say, make more sustainable. People will, the paradigm will change. So one of the things you talked about as well was, what would life be like without satellites? What is a day in the life without a satellite? I mean, that's something that you were talking about, and that must be something that's a scenario that you play in your head, and as you look at sort of the perspective of insuring folks. So imagine a day without satellites.
I think a day without satellite is a day where we won't be able to talk, Angela.
This will be a very short space cafe.
No, I think imagining a day without space today is probably the nightmare scenario. People tend to forget how much satellite and space is involved in today's life. Apart from the usual sort of thinking that people say, okay, my Teflon pan is coming from NASA or this kind of idea. I think people have no idea how much space is involved in their daily life, from satellite navigation to communication to all the picture of the Earth that they're getting from Google, to finance industry. The extent to which the finance industry is relying on satellite is incredible. Every ATM in the world is connected to GPS satellite for time stamping, for example. All financial transaction, all the stock exchange are linked, and all the transactions are time stamped by GPS, by the atomic clock on board the GPS satellite. Lots of our services are relying heavily on space. Fuel industry, the fossil industry, the fossil fuel industry is relying on satellites. obviously television, internet access, and even matter of war and peace. I think what has become very stark in recent months, sadly, is how much satellite are critical when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine at the moment. People were amazed to see that, a private individual, being the richest guy in the world, has got effectively a say in matter of war and peace between two countries. And that's true. Internet today, without internet, probably not many countries would be able to conduct military operation. Without satellite, there is no military operation. There is no guidance for your militaries, for your army, for your hardware. So we saw with Starlink how critical it was for Ukraine to keep those assets, and how effectively commercial companies have a very critical, maybe too critical, part to play in those kind of state conflicts. Yes, it is probably the ultimate nightmare scenario. It is a systemic risk. The World the World Economic Forum has mentioned space as a systemic risk. Other institutions are effectively classifying space as the same. So it is a systemic risk because everything today is networked, and satellite play a critical part there. So insurance, again, back to insurance. Where is insurance there in that sort of picture? Well, basically, we are making sure that we understand how systemic satellite could be, and we sort of trying to analyze what would be the cost and what would be effectively the way to manage or mitigate such terrible scenarios. So the first concern is looking at the asset which are making all this daily activity available, making sure that they are reliable, and not only reliable as a standalone piece of hardware, but also as part of an ecosystem as well. Where you have rockets which are able to launch on a regular basis and able to resupply satellite if required. You have access to space is also available, where satellites are being able to be reliable for enough time, where you got in orbit spare, and when there is effectively compensation and money for company involved in space to bounce back after failure, to be able to go back to a manufacturer and procure again a satellite and continue to provide services to their client and to their customers as well. So that's where insurance effectively help, first to identify the risk, and then to manage the risk, and making sure that that there is a mindset within the industry which bring management of risk at the forefront and not as an afterthought.
So you said it's GPS. So just again, how many? So GPS is free, right? GPS is free. It's a state-owned sort of set of assets. And people are often thinking, well, it's getting very congested. I mean, GPS is not in LEO, but if that finite space around the Earth is getting very, very congested, and it's not going to be regulated, which is something we'll come to because you have a view on that. What would if there was a Kessler effect, because people are talking about it's going to be a Kessler effect, and all this would be you said it yourself, without those satellites. How robust is it? I mean, how many are there, and what would it take for particularly the services that are provided by GPS to fall over and start showing critical signs here on Earth?
Yeah, GPS is first and foremost is a military constellation that was designed and launched for the need of the US military, and that was used to guide missile and military plane, basically. And in the middle of the 90s, that's where effectively the US government decided to allow commercial use of the GPS constellation because they saw a huge amount of business opportunity, and they were right. A lot of business has flourished and become successful thanks to satellite navigation. But there is a flip side to that, is that with coming free of charge, it comes basically with no guarantee. So tomorrow, if the US government decides so, they can cut GPS access to commercial users, and there would be no recourses because, first and foremost, GPS are serving the US defense establishment, and their needs may not be the same as the business community. So free of charge is good, and it has allowed effectively a huge development of the economy, but it comes with no guarantee of service, basically. Mm-hmm. So what happened is, with the business growing tremendously out of satellite navigation, other countries have become aware that, relying on the one single constellation is probably not a good success story in terms of sustainability and durability. So other countries have invested into developing constellation as well of navigation satellites. So Europe has developed its own constellation, Galileo. Again, it's mainly to address defense need, but Europe has also decided to make it available to the business community free of charge. The Russian also, because that was during the Cold War, decided effectively to develop their own military constellation, which is called GLONASS, and they've got also decided to make it free of charge to the business community. And then subsequently, China has decided to develop its own constellation, Beidou constellation. And so today, the business community rely on at least 4 full-fledged constellation. So there is effectively within them, there is redundancy. So any one constellation failure, and there is effectively within each constellation, there is effectively spare capability. And if one satellite were to fail, there is enough spare in-orbit spare to substitute it and provide as good a service. But effectively having several of them guarantees some sort of durability. But again, all 4 of those constellations are state constellations and primarily addressing defense need. So if there is a conflict one day between some or all of those nations, there is a risk that navigation, satellite navigation could be made not so available to the business community, and that would be a problem because a lot is relying on that, a lot of day-to-day activities relying on that, and that would be a systemic issue.
Yeah, that's a leverage on the economy, the immediate economy, the entire.
That would be a catastrophic outcome, and today there is no real mitigation for that. If all 4 would stop to be free of use and free of charge, it's a big question mark and a big nightmare scenario. Because now there are discussions about using other sort of space assets, including some commercial space assets, to substitute for or provide some sort of redundancy for GPS. But as of today, there is nothing as useful or as ubiquitous as the GPS, the satellite, the navigation satellite. So there would be a big problem. But as you said, GPS are fortunately MEO, which is the medium orbit, and fortunately is not as dense, is not as congested, is not as popular as the low orbit. And the low orbit are really the sort of the location where all the conversation about the Kessler syndrome and the density of space object is really coming to the fore and creating effectively somewhat a more realistic disaster scenario, more realistic because it's not under the control of government. I think in the case of GPS, unless very extreme scenario, we can't believe that the government on their own would decide to shut off the GPS satellite. Although in low orbit, it's completely outside of the control of anyone. You know, if there is a big collision in low orbit tomorrow, you know, the number of debris that would be sort of fragmented out of this collision would be enormous and would create a lot of cascade scenario as well, where many satellites could be affected. And again, you going back to that systemic sort of situation where many satellite assets are going to be disrupted. Maybe access, even worse, access to space could be prevented. And that's really, again, a sort of, in my view, a more realistic scenario than losing GPS. Although I must say, despite the sort of, you know, sort of the angst and the anxiety about, you know, the increasing risk in low orbit, we're not in a critical situation yet. But yet, and the yet is important because we are on a trend to getting there, you know, in a rather quick way if we don't do anything. Now is still the time where we could do something and impact effectively the trend and change the trend and make sure that LEO doesn't become a more risky place and a place where it's not a good location to put your space asset. And that would be a nightmare, because effectively what is being developed today is definitely a low Earth orbit economy. We're building up a computational shelf basically around the Earth, which would be able to sustain and to observe and to provide services to the Earth and to humanity on a 24/7 basis. And that's what we're building now. And that's the sort of the critical part. We need to launch much more satellite to do it, to complete that shell. But at the same time, we need to be careful how we're launching them and how we're operating them. So, and if we're not careful and if we don't know what we're doing, we're risking basically making the low Earth orbit not a computational shell, but basically a barrier between us and space. So that would be the negative scenario. And but fortunately, as I said, I think mindset are fortunately changing, and they are changing on their own, but they're also changing thanks to regulation. Right. And industry as well. Industry practices are evolving as well, and we're welcoming those change. And you know, insurance, as I said earlier, is definitely a contributor to getting to a more sustainable environment. And we want to play our part as well in making sure that those attempts are regulating space are successful, and actually successful at not only protecting space as a precious asset, but making it as a friendly space as well to do business and to develop the economy and our dreams as well.
So you talk about, there's quite a few questions here which are quite specific. Now I want to try and cover some of those too. But you know, the discussion of the maturation. What about regulation? You know, there's you talked about as this is almost like there's collaboration, international, you know, this soft diplomacy that's taking place, the Artemis, but regulation. And in fact, even there's a consultation by the UK government at the moment, right, which has just been launched out. How do you see regulation, because people feel, you know, it's unregulated, there are no rules of the road in this, it's pretty much a Wild West. What speed, you know, how fast do you think that is going to, you know, is change coming? How fast will it happen? What will the impact be on insurance policies? What do you think will be on this risk factor or severity of damage? All of the things that impact the, you know, the insurance world. Denis, what is your view of regulation and collaboration, and how do you see? Are you optimistic? I mean, one would say, is this, you know, is space? I think I asked you, you know, is space good business to be in? It looks like it's turning a corner. Over to you. How would you package all that up and help people understand what you as an insurer see is the forward scenario on this?
I like the way you use the word optimistic. Usually optimistic and insure don't go together. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I think you fed me that line during the pre-interview.
But no, I think we need to be optimistic. I think usually insurers are usually effectively doom-monger, and because supposedly it's good for the business. I don't think that way, even though the space insurance market is going through a difficult time at the moment. And that's, again, you know, going back to the sort of the growing pains. You know, it's a sector which is very innovative, where new technology is always deployed and developed, and where insurance is being called to support the deployment of that technology. And with that, there is always, you know, the reliability challenge, and it has always been the case. It's probably even more so the case today, and we're seeing a much faster deployment of new technology and new actors, and as I said, new risk management approach, and that's proving a big challenge to space insurance. And we need to effectively, we're going through a difficult time. You know, we had, you know, lots of large claim this year, and you know,
I see Alan Thompson's asking that question. Actually, he's put that in the chat. You know, 2 claims, and you know, it's
more than 2, sadly, but two large one, which is very unusual. You know, usually people tend to think that space is very risky and very hard. It is. But the people going to space are very good people, and they are making sure that usually what they send is very reliable. And but you know, it has proven that, you know, having usually we were used to have mostly reliable satellite, and now we've lots of new technology being sort of developed and launched. We have more failures. So in terms of frequency, it's a problem. And in terms of severity as well, satellites are growing bigger, their missions are bigger, the hardware is bigger. You know, that's, you know, really stretching the envelope of what's possible. And, you know, that creates some reliability challenge of which we're currently suffering. But as I said, I think that's part of the sort of the road to maturity and the growing pains, and you know, mindsets are changing. You know, what was a problem and what is still a problem is the volume and the mass of insurance is not enough. You know, there aren't enough insurance buyer to effectively make space insurance able to absorb the sort of challenged reliability that we're seeing today. But you know, effectively, I'm optimistic because I see a trend where buyers are becoming more numerous, projects are growing and maturing, and the need for insurance is becoming more important. And with that, I think the pool of insured hardware and satellite is growing, and so is the capacity for space insurer to absorb and to continue to support the development of space technology and space activity as well. So even though now it's probably not the best of time, I can effectively see that better times are coming, and we need to do our own homework to make sure that materialize. You know, homework is making sure that we get to the right pricing and the right coverage for those assets. But effectively, if we do that, and if the industry is maturing the way we're seeing the evolution going, I believe, yes, space insurance would be a good place to do business with. And it has, historically been a good place, and it has promoted the development of the space industry. We've been growing hand in hand with the commercial space industry, and we want to continue doing that. And, the commercial space is growing, and so our opportunities are growing as well. Coming back to your point about regulation, I think...
Yeah, what can governments do? I think that's what I'm saying is, so what do you think governments do to help the market function profitably?
Yeah, I think when it comes to regulation, governments have not always been very successful, and that's where there is always the risk of regulatory capture, which only benefits the incumbent. And we don't want that to happen for space. We want to make sure that space remains safe, yes, but remains open for newcomers and remain available to anyone with big dream, and also a sort of sustainability mindset as well. So we need to have a smart regulation, a modern regulation, and I think what the UK government is doing is definitely the right approach. Whether usually regulation is really sort of top down. I think the UK government very, very, very smartly is doing a bottom up and basically consulting with the users, with the operator, with the industry first and foremost. And then what comes back from the industry is going to be used to design and test the regulation. And that's what the government has been doing since the Space Industry Act in 2018. And the consultation are ongoing and have been ongoing for several years. And the industry, including insurance, has been very involved in that process. And I think what the UK government is doing is, for many years, everybody had the view that multilateral treaty activity to regulate space was blocked and was effectively a dead hand, and for good reason. We know the UN Security Council is blocked today with all the sort of conflict between Russia and the US and China and other countries. So yes, the UN may not be the open road, but there are other ways to do diplomacy, and soft diplomacy is one of them, as you mentioned. And bilateral diplomacy is another way. The Artemis Agreement, to go back to the moon, is a perfect example of that. It started with a US domestic initiative toward the moon, and it became shortly a bilateral, and then it became a multilateral between friendly nation and nation which have a sort of common goals for space. And and I think the example is now being sort of replicated by the UK. They started with a sort of domestic regulation, and now they're trying with true soft diplomacy to, and the support of, all the, the King Charles has been very involved as well, to use, the network, the huge network of the UK, the Commonwealth, to bring friendly nation within the same framework and try together to use a bottom-up approach and consult with the industry and see what the industry suggests, and to making sure that whatever regulation is going to be applicable is going to be done fast and in an efficient way and in a fast way. So that's why I'm optimistic as well, because I think with that regulation, and that's basically because the industry is already involved. The industry has taken the first step. The set of the rule of conduct today are coming from the industry. The industry has decided and has pushed government to act rather than the other way around. And because, again, the industry has a huge interest to make, say, a safe space and a sustainable space. Again, the risk is systemic, and the risk is no access to space.
Yeah.
So no access to space means no space economy, means basically going back to a day without space. So the industry has a strong interest, and insurance support the industry, and insurance has a great role to play in financing the development, making sure that we are involved, that we are putting the risk management approach at the forefront of the regulation. And that's what is being done today. The UK government comes with a license scheme where insurance, TPL insurance, is becoming mandatory, but mandatory is not enough. Mandatory could be a blunt instrument and could be effectively part of the sort of erecting too high a wall for newcomers. So mandatory has to be, again, adapted and tailor-made to the risk involved with emission, and not used in a uniform way. And that's what is.
Yeah, you mentioned before there was the, it was all to do, this $100 million kind of figure for insured, which became 60 million euros, dates back from the missile program of 1950s of the USA, and it doesn't take into cognizance at all the kind of individual satellites and the smaller satellites and the different, and that's a flipping, that's what I think, that's what you're calling modernization of that. You also said that you thought, Denis, that you can comment on that, but the other piece you'd said was you thought that manned people are asking about, the moon activities, or mining, or the new sort of in-service orbits, and these new space platforms, platforms that are on orbit. So that would change it. People asking, how would we insure these? What, if they're commercial now rather than being, the International Space Station, etc. So in-orbit servicing and all those things. What is that? Is that the way? Is that going to drive more towards insurance? What is your view of all of that? I think people are asking that question.
Yeah, that's the fascinating future. That the space that we all dreamed about, that the space that basically was sold to the population in the 70s. Remember in the 70s, people were telling that by 2000, people would go on holiday to space and people would mine the moon. It doesn't materialize because some choices were made that, focus space endeavors toward low orbit and, sort of space station in low orbit. But now we've finally, thanks to technology, thanks to private individual, thanks to small company, those dreams are becoming more real today. And we are only a few years before effectively the development of not space-bound economy, but a space-based economy. So where manufacturing would be done in space, for space, where resource harvesting is going to be done in space, where travel is going to be space to space, where exploration is going to be available, and where commercial space station, not the ISS, but commercial space station, and not only in low orbit. There are some plans for space station around the moon and in Lagrangian point as well. So this is the future, but this is a future which is realistic and near. So, and insurance is going to adapt to that. Insurance was with the industry when it developed the space shuttle, when it developed the sea launch. Sea launch was a fantastic endeavor. It was launching rocket from a platform, an oil rig. That was made available because of it was insured. Insurance has insured the first non-astronaut passenger on Soyuz. People may not remind, but now people are talking about Virgin Galactic and those billionaires. But in the early 2000s, billionaires or millionaires at the time bought seats on board Soyuz and went to spend a couple of weeks on the space station. And that was made available because those guys were able to find insurance for that trip to space. So space was there, and the space insurer knows how to adapt and to assess and put a price on those new technology and those new activities. So when those are materializing, and we are talking already with those commercial space station operator. Just yesterday, I was talking with people at Sierra Space. They've got fantastic plan. They've got a space shuttle, which one day will carry humans to their own commercial space station. And those days are not in far away time. We spoke with people working at Starship. Starship is going to become a reality very shortly, and there are others program as well, in orbit fueling, in orbit servicing. All the technology are being built today. Some of them are existing already, and there is only a very sort of final push which is required for those to be launched and to thrive. And so that sort of activity would lead to not only space insurance, but in-space insurance. So insurance for your mining activity on the moon, insurance for your fueling activity on the moon, insurance for traveling into moon. So, the same way that the Wild West effectively became the Far West, and the Wild West became the Silicon Valley, I think, space is going through the same evolution. There's going to be some hiccups along the way. That's the growing pains and the maturation. And there is a stage where space will become maybe more dangerous, because again, it's a place where there's going to be a lot of opportunity and huge opportunity, and so that's attracting competition between state, but between commercial entities as well. So there is effectively an angle which is very risky, but at the same time, I believe that the trend is positive, and the same way, again, the Far West has evolved to the Silicon Valley. There is effectively a future for space to evolve along the same line. So
people are sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to finish on a sort of high note, I believe, some believe that space and, Mars or other planet could be a redundancy, a good redundancy for humanity in case of a catastrophe. I believe it could be the case, but more than that, I think, or more sort of near to us, I think, space has definitely in it, and, in the space activity that are developing today and would develop in the near future, the potential to definitely solve a lot of the problem that we are now facing on the Earth. And, whether it's, Earth's environment concern, which could be better addressed from space, better monitored from space, or technology which could be deployed and tested in space before it comes down to generate, benefits. That's the molecule that for pharmaceutical company that are being developed in space today. That's the material, the new material that are being developed in space for Earth solution as well. So there are huge potential in space in the near future that could effectively generate a lot of good for humanity and the Earth. And I think that would be effectively a way for space not only to become sustainable, but to make Earth more sustainable.
Sustainable also. Yep. Are we frozen, or is Denis frozen? Are you still with it? Oh no, you're blinking, so that's fine. So I think what you're ending on is that is where, space will be. It's almost going to help us, but we do have to. And I think you're saying maturity. Just to summarize, maturity of the sector in its financing will return back to insurance being important. People are asking specific questions about, if you do in-service, if you extend the life of a satellite, how will you then, insurance will be there? These are some technical things. People are asking if, how would you've got a commercial like a Starship, how do you work out the insurance of a Starship, something that's planning to be up there for all of that time? And is this just simple numbers? You just work it out once it gets there? It's sort of fine. But I think the key thing you're saying is that regulation a maturity of the sector, and international collaboration is coming, but soft diplomacy through agreements like the Artemis. I think those are the things that make you optimistic about, as well as the careful exploitation, the good exploitation that space is going to offer. You think that makes space insurance a good business to be in, as well as the satellite services that you'll be providing to help us manage the Earth. Would that encase sort of what you've been saying over the last time?
Good summary, Angela. Thank you. Yeah, I think maturity is coming. You know, we are effectively, you know, I repeat, you know, it's a new activity. It's an emerging activity. Space has been around for a long time, but commercial space and the new sort of and the new breed of commercial space hasn't been around for long. And now it's the sector which is booming and really growing. And you know, it is going through you know the pains of growing and growing fast. But maturity is around the corner. Maturity is coming, is already there for some of them. And with maturity come a more sort of cautious mindset, a more sort of protective mindset, a more sort of mindset open to good regulation, good practices, collaboration. And as you say, you know, collaboration doesn't need to be from the get-go multilateral. It could grow from, you know, domestic and bilateral, and then a small group of friendly nations, and then grow to effectively a multilateral domain. So we are starting to see the first sign of that, and you know, we definitely encouraging them. And just final word to address some of the questions that were addressed. I think space services is potentially a game changer, because for a long time, you know, the paradigm was you launch things in space, and if they fail, there is no way to repair them, and they're going to stay there forever. I think space servicing basically is changing that paradigm. Basically, it means that you don't need to build satellite in the same fashion, you know, with tons of, you know, redundancy and tons of resources. You can build lighter satellites or satellite which could be repaired and could be, you know, service in orbit, and where the life could be extended in a meaningful way. And again, so that means that the technology doesn't need to be as complex, or the satellite don't need to be as expensive. And again, that makes space more accessible. And with space becoming more accessible, I think you're going to have more space buyer. And insurance, with space insurance, would have to take into consideration is not the same where your asset is repairable and when its life could be extended than when, you know, it's the ultimate thing. You know, he has to bring everything on board with him, you know, his fuel, his power, all his spare parts. So that's changing the game. And again, we're supporting servicing initiative. There are two commercial initiatives today in space. You know, Northrop Grumman has developed a couple of those. They are working today. They are servicing, you know, all satellites that with them have regained a new lease of life, and those assets are currently being insured. So we're supporting the development. And you know, when effectively there is a number of those servicing, that would definitely change the overall sort of paradigm for the way we're looking at the reliability of space asset, and obviously the pricing as well. And that goes along the same way for sustainability. If you can service a satellite, you can repair it, but you can deorbit it. And today, I think there is not many options in terms of satellite deorbiting. We want to do it faster. That's good. But the location of where we're doing it is critical as well. We spoke about that. I don't want to spend too much time now because we're getting to the end of the program. But basically, today, the motto is when the satellite is mission life is finished, for geosatellite, you put it in the graveyard, which is good. it's out of the way. That's good. But for low orbit, a lot of satellites today don't have propulsion. That's the current crop, but most of the satellite, the majority of the new satellite got propulsion, so they are going to be able to move at the end of their life, and that's a very good thing. But the question becomes now, where do you go? The usual thinking was you deorbit, you burn your satellite in the atmosphere, and the reasoning is good. You uncluttering low orbit, which is good, but that's a short-term fix. That's good when you have thousands of satellites in space and maybe a few dozens in need of deorbitation every year. When we're going to get to hundreds of thousands satellites in low orbit and thousands of them going to deorbit every year, it's not going to do it. Basically, deorbiting and burning them into the Earth atmosphere and vaporizing, a lot of metal in the high atmosphere of the Earth is not a very sustainable solution. Neither is dropping stuff into the bottom of the ocean. So we'll have to come
flying through the aircraft space as well, right? I mean,
absolutely. So you don't want a satellite rain. You don't want that. So at some stage, we will need to think about a location for low orbit satellite to go in a safe way. And that's where effectively servicing satellite could be a game changer, because with their onboard propulsion, going far away from LEO is probably not possible because of the size, because of the capacity of the onboard propulsion. But in specific satellites, servicing satellites, you could imagine to use those to boost LEO orbit satellite way above, in the sort of in location where they don't create an issue for thousands and thousands of years.
I know we're way over because Torsten's been flagging up to me, but do you think the insurance world, if you do have design for demise, a plan for demise, an end-of-life plan for your satellite, is that going to be factored in? I mean, are you going to factor that in? This is a question, the sustainability piece. If you're just like, no, I've no propulsion, I don't care, I'm going to I'll be one of those hundreds of thousands that will fall through the sky. Will you give preferential insurance? Do you think the world, I'm not saying you, but do you think we'll get to a point where that's not going to be insurable? That might not be as insurable. And you really will have to have these other facets built into your demise plan, your end of life plan.
That's exactly the right question, Angela. Absolutely. It's today, I think, not launching without propulsion is something which makes obtaining insurance much more difficult. And more than that, it's there will be a time where launching without propulsion is not going to be allowed, just because the state providing license are not going to allow you to basically put a brick in space. And so I think insurance is going to effectively influence that. And we're seeing already, the size of the satellite is growing. And with the size growing, that means that you got space for propulsion. So propulsion is becoming less and less the exception, is becoming more and more the solution and the standard. So propulsion, it doesn't solve all the issue about sustainability and risk of collision, but it goes a long way, and it's a good short-term mitigation of the risk. So yes, I think we are doing what we can at our level to make sure that launching without propulsion is not really something to contemplate today. And we need also the same sort of consideration by the government when providing licenses as well. And that's why we are part of this consultation, and that's exactly why the government is using the feedback from the industry and from insurers to carve the next regulation. And I think the next regulation will address this point. Propulsion propulsion is one of them, but there are, other way, tracking device, way to be passive tracking, solution as well is one of them. Just to make sure that what you're doing is conscious of, the Earth orbit and sustainability.
Excellent. Now, Torsten is saying, really, we've had this has been fantastic. It's been an hour and 15 minutes. And I think that last piece is really important because a lot of people are asking that. Torsten, please come on and do the wrap up. I think, thank you for that. I think, sorry if anybody didn't get their question. I tried to hone in on some of them. Some of them were very specific, but I do think that we've been given quite an overview by Denis. How is the insurance industry going to come out from where it's at? How will it impact what goes up into space and make sure that it is sustainable? And Denis, your line is because space really is the asset that humanity can use to help itself, to augment its ability to survive and to manage the planet. And thank you for that. Thank you so much for your insight and sharing it here today.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thanks for the invite, and thank you, Torsten, as well for giving me the opportunity to speak today to our audience. And for any question that may not have been answered, please, I'm happy to take it offline. You can get my contact details, and I'll be happy to further answer any question. Thank you very much again, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for the insights. I'm quite sure there are a lot of more areas we can dig into, and we will over time. But it's a Friday afternoon, and before we say goodbye, let me come up with a few of the events that we have on our agenda. So there are no space cafes the next week because we are traveling. We will be at Aurora Tech's Fire Conference, where Emma will give a keynote on the 4th of October. I will be at Andoya to talk about the strategic framework. And the week after, I will be in Berlin at the Intergeo, if any of you guys are here. On the 17th, we are planning the next 33 minutes with Paul Lias from Estonia to give us an update about this fascinating country in the north or east of Europe. And then on the 18th, we have in Germany, in Berlin, the German Space Congress, 24th, 25th, Spaceport Norway, another event I would like to point your attention to. So because the things that are going on in Norway are really incredible, and we are very pleased to report about it. And on the 26th, we have our next planned Space Cafe Israel by the wonderful Medad Payente. All the events are going to be online on Eventbrite as usual. So, as always, we like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. And if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher. And I have to jump here again that you see that I'm wearing my Space Watcher t-shirt here today. So thank you all for your interest today. And thank you, Denis and Angela, for the wonderful conversation. And I hope you all will stay safe and healthy. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. In the meantime, visit our website or follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Greatly enjoyed that. Thank you, Angela.